Hi, I'm Marcus, and for my capstone I made a game with asteroids, snakes, and a bit of cheese. Welcome to AST-Emmental. Level 0. Exploration and Context. Starting out, I wanted to learn front-end programming with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. In the past, I had attempted to create a website, but I didn't get very far. I used Notepad and Chrome, but ended up getting bored very quickly. With this in mind, I began to brainstorm ideas. I wanted to make a game, blog, project hub, and an online store all packaged into one giant website. However, I knew that doing all this would be way too much work. So I first tried making a blog using Weebly. I laid out multiple pages, including an about me, and wrote some article drafts. But I soon found out that making a blog was not for me. In the end, I decided to make a game. Going in, my first idea was to create a tower defense, one of my favorite childhood game genres. This gave me some direction as I learned coding through courses and created designs with Photoshop and GIMP. Level 1. The Tower Defense. I played Bloons Tower Defense a lot in my childhood, and I also really like futuristic robotic designs. So I decided to combine the two in a post-apocalyptic world with cool mecha turrets in the ruins of cities. To define a successful project, I set myself 3 main goals. 1. A player, 2. A goal for the player to reach, and 3. Obstacles blocking the player from the goal. I planned to have the player as the turrets, with a goal of defending their base. Then the obstacle would be enemies that try to attack the base, just like in Bloons Tower Defense. I made some concept art and outlined my game onto paper, and after creating the general structure in HTML, I hit many roadblocks. How would I place turrets, make the turrets turn and shoot, and how would I generate enemies and move them along set paths? This was all way beyond my abilities at the time, so I turned to simpler arcade-style games. Wanting to continue my tower defense in the future, I chose to replicate Asteroids, an arcade game from the 70s. Both involve rotating, shooting sprites, and involve moving enemies, so I thought it would be a good start. But I still got stuck at the same problems before. This time, how would the player ship rotate and shoot projectiles at an angle? At this point, I just wanted to see something move on the screen and do something. So I quickly swerved my project in the direction of Snake, another game from the 70s. In the style of Snake, the player would collect asteroids instead of shooting them. Thus, my final goals were a player as a ship, a goal of getting a high score, and for the obstacles, I planned red asteroids that would explode the player's ship. With that, I began to code once more. Level 2. The Beginning. Starting fresh once again, I made one HTML file, one CSS file, and a bunch of JavaScript files. A nice analogy for these is a house. HTML is like the wooden framework, which helps hold the CSS and JavaScript. Then CSS acts as the floors, walls, and the furniture. It makes the house look a lot better and feel more comfortable. Lastly, JavaScript finalizes the house, making it functional with electricity, plumbing, heating, and more. With all three, the house becomes a very nice place to visit, just like a good website. Following the framework for my tower defense, I made a game wrapper, title, and imported my sprite designs, which I made using Photoshop. Here are a few screenshots. I used a 16 by 16 pixel canvas, inspired by the many pixel games I've played, and drew sprites based off of reference images I found online. One inspiration was the A-Wing from Star Wars. Then, I tried to move the ship sprite. My first code prototype didn't work, and I wasn't really surprised. I sifted through the internet to eventually find that I made a logic error. I was detecting the wrong type of key input, so with the help of a key code website, I quickly got my code working. Seeing the ship move was a great boost to my confidence and inspired me to continue. With one major milestone down, I only had 2 to go. Also, all the code for my game can be found in my GitHub in the description below. More coding! Over the course of the next month, I continued to code my game, occasionally writing pseudocode to help with the logic. A major problem early on was that the imported sprites were blurry and did not crop. I tried my best to fix this at the time, but eventually let it go for future me to deal with. I generated random asteroids using math.random and some range values, allowing the asteroids to appear in-game. Here's a quick test that shows the asteroid generation range. Then, I coded collisions ineffectively and increased a score variable every time the player collided with an asteroid. Collisions were a very difficult challenge to visualize, so I ended up writing pseudocode to help. After some brain cramps, the collisions worked. This was great news and motivated me to continue going strong. Now, I had a player and had a goal. Unfortunately, I soon realized that challenging the player with good enemies and challenges takes a long time, just like trying to write a good essay. With that, I brainstormed many additions and took note of some quality of life changes I could make, then continued to code. I worked on the user interface, picking a dark blue from a space background I found, and using color theory to choose a shade of orange in contrast. I also remade the title, calling the game Asteroids Plus, and later, Astro Snakes. Next, I added red asteroids which explode the player and move along vectors. Then, I coded scaling as the score went up, making the game more difficult by increasing the speed of the player and the red asteroids. I also considered homing enemies, but at the time other things interested me more, so I moved on. More polishes went by, including a new title, more customization, and adjustments to the gameplay. A notable addition was the yellow asteroid, based off the story of a moon made of cheese. The thing with the yellow asteroid is that it gives you 5 times more points, but slows your ship down. So, I gave it a double meaning, either eating stellar cheese than feeling too full to fly as quick, or mining yellow gold, which is heavier but worth more money. I added new sprites to play as, including a UFO and a snake. I also added sound effects and music, borrowed from opengameart.org. Lastly, I made a bunch of polishes and finally got around to fixing the blurry sprite issue. And eventually, I found that I wanted to begin working on a video presentation. Level 3. Publishing. There's an endless number of possible changes I can make, so I wrapped up my game and tried to share it online. I remembered that there was a magical place called GitHub that I had tried to use in the past, but didn't get very far in either. With similar feelings about GitHub as with my Mandarin homework, I saw this as the perfect opportunity to revisit something I should have explored sooner. I opened up my GitHub account, made a new repository, and began to upload all my sprites, code, and audio clips. It was only at this point where I finally began to feel like a real developer, like the tutorial had finished. I also felt happy to share my project and its DNA online, potentially helping another programmer, or maybe adding fun to someone's day. Then, I began creating a video presentation to summarize my journey, with the plan to post it on YouTube to the public. My first iteration was creating a slideshow, done out of habit. However, after working on my presentation for hours and hours with Canva and DaVinci Resolve, I realized that it was really boring. I also realized that the video would be much longer than I anticipated, but I wanted to capture my experience as accurately as possible, so I had to compromise. Once again, I looked online for inspiration and came across devlogs on a YouTube binge. Devlogs are small packets of progress on games across various developers, which were very entertaining and interesting to watch. So, I wanted my presentation in a similar format. I made a new timeline in DaVinci Resolve and began to plan a better script using Notion. With the help of my old slideshow in Canva, I made a script over the next few months. Eventually, with dozens of recordings in Voice Recorder, a bunch of media imported to my project, and advice from my family and mentor, I was almost done. The final thing to do is reflect. I really struggled to keep my reflection meaningful and concise, typing countless drafts. After all, how could I summarize my countless hours into a few sentences? So, mixing a bit of English in, the plot diagram goes as follows. First, I wanted to learn computer science as it's my intended major in university, and programming was a creative interest I wanted to pursue after being inspired by creators online. Next, having made detours from a blog, a tower defense, and an Asteroids remake, I ended up settling on a space-themed remix of Snake. In the process of actualizing this game, I developed my creative and critical thinking when designing and coding new game features, like the sprite movement of the player and the asteroid generation as a goal. Here's a list of skills I've leveled up in. I managed to learn more computer science and made a game with a player, goal, and obstacles. An absolute win. Moreover, from encountering coding problems like collision detections, I have sharpened my focus, organization, and visualization. On top of these milestones, I also created a video presentation with nearly 100 voice recordings and many iterations of scripts. This developed my communication as I learned to be more concise with language and got more comfortable with my voice. Through creating a game and video, I've also gained a deeper understanding of myself. I realized that I often got impatient and stressed with uncertainty, like when I couldn't find a bug or whether or not a new feature would work. By clarifying this, I could begin to work with my feelings, identifying the frustration or resistance and taking a step back to think. I found that following online courses and tutorials step by step led to a weak understanding of programming. Instead, by immersing myself through a personal project unique to the tutorials and courses, I found that I could grasp the concepts better intuitively, and that I like learning through application. Overall, I learned to take more risks experimenting, and to be more adaptable, welcoming changes and mistakes. I gained a greater appreciation for the creators who spend hours working on videos after experiencing it firsthand, and I also gained a growing passion for my own game and video creation. I've broken through barriers that once held me back, opening up new paths, opportunities, and perspectives, like when I finally began to use GitHub, learning about its wonderful capabilities. With new dreams, a new creative outlet, and new skills, working on AST-Emmental, as cheesy as this sounds, has truly been a life-changing journey. Now, I plan to continue adding to my game to learn more coding skills, and to pursue more interests, including the tower defense I originally planned to make. I'm also looking forward to future breakers beating my personal high score of 261, sharing their own inspiring stories, and especially for breaking through their own barriers to become better than yesterday. Although this is a very flashy line, I really do hope that you can try a new project or continue working through one to better change your life and the lives around you. So, this has been my journey creating a game of space and cheese, AST-Emmental. Thanks for watching, peace out, and stay hydrated.